My guest today is Salomon Ligthelm, an award-winning self-taught filmmaker. Now, he is a son of missionary parents who opened his eyes to the world, and he has an eye for film. His work has garnered recognition across the world with inclusion in both the Saatchi & Saatchi and the 1.4 New Directors Showcases. 2 golds and 3 silvers at the YDAs and a Gold Cannes Lion, multiple AICP wins, with work featured at the MOMA and shortlist for Music Video of the Year at Shots, Best Alternative Video, and Best New Director, and a growing list of awards from the industry, including the British Arrows, Cannes, and DAAD. But his newest short film, the powerful, compelling drama, Moeder. I should say Moeder, which is the correct way of saying that, which explores the disaster of Flight MH17. A passenger plane that was shot down by Russian forces. The film puts us at ground level when a miner on the Ukrainian-Russian border discovers a ringing phone in his backyard. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome filmmaker Salomon Ligthelm and his Oscar-qualifying short, Moeder, to the show. Welcome, Salomon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, first off, I'm a bit curious. Your parents were missionaries, and how did they open your eyes to the world? And did those experiences lead you into filmmaking?
Yeah, I think in some strange way it did. I grew up in South Africa. I was born and raised until I was 12. I was in this neighborhood of Johannesburg called Kempton Park, a very industrial, very sort of blue collar town. My parents in my early childhood would travel to like Soviet Russia. Spent a lot of time between Turkey and Russia when I was between 7 and 9 years old, maybe even earlier actually. We did a lot of missionary camps in South Africa, and just as like training of because my parents had a desire to go live abroad. And so my dad learned Russian. We were going to move to Russia. Then we were going to move to Azerbaijan. It sort of changed. Then we were going to move to Tehran. And finally we settled in Dubai, where I moved when I think I was 12 years old. And that experience, the experience of like leaving South Africa in some ways was a very eye-opening experience, because when you grow up, maybe it's the same here in the US, but when you grow up in small town South Africa or small town America, you sort of think that is the world. And being able to sort of like leave the shores of South Africa for Dubai and sort of experience a different culture, and really did open my eyes to the world, just create an interest in cultures and different cultures and subcultures and those contexts, but also allowed me to, which I wasn't able to in South Africa, dream of the possibility of being a creative. Because otherwise you sort of grow up thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to do engineering, or I'm going to work at that plant. And so, yeah, the dream of becoming a filmmaker or doing anything creative in South Africa, certainly during the late 90s, for someone my age, there just wasn't that dream. It's either you become a rugby player or you follow in your father's or your mother's footsteps doing engineering or something like that.
Well, now I'm really curious. Did you end up in Dubai before Dubai became this international business center and a very big tourist attraction now?
Yeah, it was right at the cusp. So it was 1999, and the city was, I want to say, just sort of exploding. Obviously, during the financial crisis of 2008, the city sort of like it sort of did this, and then it did this, and then 2012 it sort of started to peak up again. But I certainly saw a huge amount of change while I was there. Definitely.
Yeah, that is so interesting to hear. Now, let's talk about this incredible film, Moeder, which is not only compelling and powerful, it's a heartbreaking drama. Based
Right.
on the true events of the downing of Flight MH17, what intrigued you to tell this story?
I've had a big fascination with that part of the world. My like I said, my parents sort of traveled to that part of the world quite frequently, and we actually had a South African missionary, but who worked in Odessa. She was stationed in Odessa, and she lived in our house. And so she would sort of recount her stories, and she would sort of go and come back and go and come back and sort of recount her story. So that part of the world was always a sort of a fascination for me, and I traveled there frequently as well for work, doing commercials or music videos. I had shot a music video on the mine that's represented in the film. Maybe 3 or 4 years prior, I had shot a music video for The Weekend, and then a friend of mine during the pandemic had sent me. We were all just creating, we were all just writing, and one of my friends sent me an article and an idea for a short film. That he was more like a producer, and it was this top line outline of the story for Moeder, which had a slightly different shape to the way that the film turned out, but it really grabbed me because there was a big context, a big political context to the story, but at the heart of it, it was a very, very universal, singular story of sort of showing the traumatic collateral, basically, of war in a very singular, personal, individualistic story. And it's not told from a soldier's point of view. It's the collateral of just the normal, everyday people that have to sort of live in amongst an area that's in such conflict. And there was a conceptual conceit in the story that I leaned into really hard, which I think was a little bit of a high wire act, which is everything revolved around this phone call, and this device, and the character being um, uh, almost like catatonic, withdrawn from the world until that final moment of the film. There was something in that I was like, you know what, it's a big commitment to sort of go there, but I really want to explore that. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's sort
and
of
you
what.
you did. And you took us through so many different emotions. And in the film, actor Chris Galust plays Vitaly, who
Mhm.
finds the smartphone in his backyard. It belonged to a young man whose body fell from the plane and landed in
Mhm.
his yard.
Mhm.
And so I did a little research because I remember when flight MH17 went down. It is the
Mhm.
deadliest aircraft disaster caused by being shot down, and in this case,
Mhm.
Russian separatists.
Mhm.
How widespread was the debris from the plane? And did people on the ground actually find cell phones whose loved ones kept calling?
Yeah, yeah, it was. It was. I think it was across 3 cities. I mean, I sort of focused my story on this area of called Rozsypne because those were the, and I might be even pronouncing that incorrectly, but that's the areas where the miners came to. This was the miners, the coal miners of Rozsypne that combed the area. But I think it was across three different cities or towns. So it was a large area, and people found everything. They found passports, they found pieces of the plane, and bodies. I mean, there's one story, one because I did a lot of research, just combing through articles, and Vice did an 8-part documentary series called Russian Roulette about the MH17 flight disaster. And I mean, there's a story of a guy that found a body sort of crashed through his chimney, through his living room. And I mean, they describe in sort of like brutal detail, like the shape of the bodies as they were falling. Like bum first, legs up, arms up. So there is so much detail in the recounting of these stories that we were able to draw from, but this is sort of an amalgamation of stories because the sort of the insight that I was drawing from was just this insight that there were loved ones on the other side of the world in the Netherlands reaching out to their loved ones that were on the planes, and they found strangers picking up phones, speaking in foreign voices. And I just thought that there's a sort of an interesting, imagine having to deliver something so heartbreaking as telling someone, and not having the language to do that. Again, my fascination with languages, I think, comes from having to learn languages multiple times, Arabic to Russian, and having tried. I mean, my first name is Reinhard. And I had to change my first name when I moved to Dubai because no one could say it. So I just went with my middle name, Salomon. So the idea of miscommunication that can happen over languages, we took a couple of minutes before this interview just talking about how to pronounce things. That's also at the heart of this film, and certainly at the end of this film, as you see Vitaly's character trying to learn a new language to try and communicate something so traumatic, and trying to do that right. There was something that I wanted to sort of explore in that as well. So
Yeah, there
it
was.
was a fascinating process.
Yeah, Solomon. I mean, there is so many little nuances in this film, and it's more in the in-depth storytelling. And if people will take time when they see this film, instead of just watching it as a film, but literally seeing how you put all of the little pieces together to create just something so compelling to watch. And and I was doing some extra research to learn of the area and where the plane was shot down, how difficult the investigation was. Like you said, it was, the debris was spread across 3 towns. For you, were you ever able to maybe talk with any of the miners themselves, or was it just more of the research you did to see how they recounted their stories?
Yeah, we weren't able to because that area was so like we shot 3 months before the war started, and that area was sort of on high alert. So we didn't have access. We didn't have access to talk to any of the miners, but a lot of the people on the ground in Ukraine, in Kiev, the production company that I've worked with, they gave me a lot of insight, just very specific sort of cultural nuance. Because initially, again, sort of not fully sort of understanding the finer details. Initially, I was wanting to shoot this film in Ukraine in Ukrainian, because I thought, okay, it's in Ukraine, we're going to shoot in Ukrainian. But my Kiev-based crew said no. That part of Ukraine, they hardly speak. The percentage of people that speak Ukrainian in Donbass and Donetsk is really, really low. The more authentic way to tell the story is to do it in Russian. And again, this is 3 months before the war, so the war hadn't happened, so there wasn't the cultural stigmatization at the time for hearing people speak in Russian. But that was sort of the authentic way to do it. So I had both my first AD, who was very sort of knowledgeable in that part of the world. He currently serves on the front lines in the war. And then Anatoly was sort of my dialect coach and my actor liaison. And so between the two of them and my Ukrainian producer, Daniel, we sort of constructed just this version of the story that felt both true to the articles that we had read and also sort of true to their experience in Ukraine.
Wow. This film is very, very authentic. And I mean, the acting from Chris Galust is absolutely amazing to watch. He does it. I think he only has what, 1 or 2 lines. No. He's got more than that, because if you take away the phone call,
Yeah.
a lot of his acting is on his face. It's
Yeah.
very emotional. You can feel what he's going through, what he's feeling. Like you said, it's very catatonic because it's so shocking. And to be working at a mine and then be told not even just by your boss, but to be told by the military that you're going to go out into this field and you're going to be marking with a stick and a flag where all the bodies are.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, hey, you wake up one morning, I'm going to go to my regular job. I'm going to go work in the mine. Oh no, I'm going to go walk out into a field looking for dead bodies. I mean, that is
Yeah.
traumatic.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, like I said earlier, I feel like that to me was sort of the high wire act, was having sort of a character that sort of, I feel like I could do that in a short film. I never could do that in a feature film because you're keeping the audience at such a distance. But I was like, if I can do that for a short film, then hopefully by the end, when he does speak, it really does feel like it's sort of paying off emotionally, both in content, because that's been even withheld from the audience, and then also just emotionally when you sort of like learn what he's holding inside, and why he's been so sort of reserved. And I think I remember the first thing we shot of Chris, where we really saw his face, was when he came out of the mine for the first time on ground level. I think it was one of the first things we shot. I think it was the first thing we shot, and I just remember seeing him carry that emotionally. Very simple. I want to say simple because there's no dialogue, but to sort of make the internal world register externally, I think is not easy to do. And I looked at Chris and I was like, he's carrying this film, and a part of it was going to be performance, and then part of it's how we shape it in the edit, because you still have to engage the audience. Like there's so much informational restraint or withholding that we're doing, and there's also so much emotional restraint and withholding that we're doing. And so part of the thing that I wanted to do was sort of allow the audience to try to fill in the pictures. Even the camera is quite restrained, if you've sort of noticed. Like, it's a lot of locked off shots, it's a lot of like dolly shots. So sound for me was a really important way to start to clue the audience in. And I also didn't want to show the disaster. Like, I really wanted to withhold that from the audience and really not show dead bodies until really the end, and then you're sort of seeing it from a distance. So a lot of the coloring, it was the theater of the mind, right? So like, in trying to engage the audience through their imagination, and having sound design play a big role in doing that was sort of key, because there was going to be a lot of emotional, conceptual, and narrative restraint. So
Yeah,
balance.
because here when you're looking at the scene at the mine, when the boss man or the foreman is telling these guys, we're not going to be here today, we're going to be going somewhere else, and
Right.
he's not really open as to what they're actually going to be doing.
Yeah.
But Vitaly has already found the phone, so that already
Yeah.
set up the trauma and the catatonic state that he portrays.
Mm-hmm.
But when he is standing with a group of miners and everybody else is, you got that one guy making sarcastic remarks.
Mm.
People are kind of making a little jokes about the military, and he stands there literally. There's this fear, there's
Yeah.
this trauma, there's this heaviness that he is carrying. He never says a word, but you can feel it, you can see it on his face, because he already found the phone. Nobody else
Mm-hmm.
knows. So he's going to work carrying this heavy, heavy weight. But that
Mm-hmm.
scene speaks volumes. And
Right.
but then he carries that when he goes
Mm.
out into the field. So I was looking at the different shots of just Chris. You see the shot when he's sitting on the steps because he found the phone, and he's looking at it because it's ringing, but he's not answering it. Oh no, or he
Mm-hmm.
did answer it, but he never says a
Yeah,
word.
he hears a voice. He hears the mother's voice.
Right. So he doesn't say anything. Then you see the look on his face when they're being told, you're going to be doing something different today. Then when
Mm-hmm.
they get out to the field, and then when he walks up upon the cow that got hit by debris, that look
Mm-hmm.
on his face. Oh, that
Mm-hmm.
was $1 million shot right there. And then when he basically took that branch with the flag on it and staked that area, I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, just the motion of him stabbing it into the ground
Hmm.
was just so strong and filled with emotion, and he never said a word. But then you see the looks on his face when he's sitting there with his wife, before in front of the reporter.
Hmm.
You cast that perfectly for that part.
Right. The funny thing is, so that scene, I had this sort of conceptual idea is like, I want him not to say a word right until the end of the film. Like, I want him to be mumbling maybe a little bit because that's him learning a new language. And and the thing is, Chris is a sort of a fluent Russian and Ukrainian speaker. He's got mom and dad from that part of the world, and I was like, I don't want to only hear at the end of the film he's sort of like struggling with the Dutch, when actually I've casted this friend of mine who I'm like trying to work on a feature film. That's we've been trying to do that for a long time, and then this project came along, and I was like, Chris, can you can you come and do this with me? But as we were sitting there doing that reporter scene, I was like, I said to you, like, don't do any dialogue, like that's in the script. But actually, I feel like I want you to start to recount what had happened, because I partly I wanted to feel like you're of the place, you speak the language, you are embedded in that culture, in that place, and I also want to sort of feel the sort of the your wife is sitting next to you, and she's asking you to tell the story because maybe it can help our finances, maybe it can help this humble life that we're living, and so he should try. And so that's a little bit of the dialogue that we have, and then obviously when he's like learning a little bit, just two scenes prior to the penultimate scene, when he's sort of like learning that little bit of Dutch, that's the only little bit, and then yes, then it's the main part of the film. But for the most part, yeah, he's a pretty quiet character. And again, I think it's also going to be quite divisive. Some people are going to go on the ride with that, and other people are going to be like, give me more.
Here's how I looked at it. He and his wife are sitting on their sofa before the reporter. She's trying to do a news piece. They paid him $100, and he is trying to recount what he has seen. But he has already been told by his foreman, no one is to go home and talk about this with your loved ones. Not actually knowing that maybe not he could be not the only miner that had debris or a body in their yard. And then he's caught between what his foreman told him, what his wife wants, and I love, like you said, he's trying to just to get a line or two out, and then he stops. But it shows the emotional trauma of the whole situation. And but you also did something that I really liked, because Vitaly's wife was pregnant. And I think if a lot of people pay attention to that element, it goes back to the mother who is calling her son's cell phone, which then reminds Vitaly, okay, I've got a child on the way. How what if I was in that mother's situation? And so I'm glad that you made his wife pregnant in the film, because it really adds to the whole depth of the story.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you caught that. Like, I mean, it's always my hope that it invites second and third viewings, that people sort of dissect, because so much of the information, like I said, is sort of hidden from the audience. And hopefully when you sort of see the reveal at the end, you can piece some of the rest of the film when you're on a second viewing, a bit more of it makes sense. But I'm glad you sort of clued onto that, because I think even in that is the sort of is the title about Yeva's character, because she is a mother, or is it about the woman on the other side of the line? It invites a little bit of another viewing or two, hopefully.
Well, that's, and what's funny too, she doesn't know the Dutch language either. And
No.
so she's looking at him in the kitchen going, are you cheating on me?
Right.
Like who is Moeder? She doesn't
Exactly.
know. She doesn't know it's just a word for mother.
Yeah.
And that added even a little bit more stress and tension
Right.
to Vitaly's character. And but I also went back and when because I've watched this film a few times, a lot of people may need to really pay attention to this very minute detail, which I'm really glad you showed. And you have to kind of catch it if you're not paying attention. Is when he charges up the phone.
Hmm.
It's almost like he doesn't want to lose that
Right.
lifeline, but at the same time, if a phone goes dead and you're the one calling a phone, it
Yeah.
immediately either goes to voicemail, or if you're going to text that phone, usually the color changes of the text. And so
Right.
he was keeping the phone alive, and in a way keeping
Yeah.
his memory alive for the young man's mother.
It's so true. That's it's a very very astute observation, because it's not something. It's something we discussed actually when we were shooting it, because it wasn't necessarily in the script, but we were sort of piecing together just the feasibility of everything, especially with time passing, especially because he would have been out the whole day. Would that phone still remain charged? And he made sure it was when he came back to it. So that was it's a very careful, astute observation. From when she finds it in the cupboard, it's connected to a charger, so it's been sitting there charging. It speaks to his diligence, and it also speaks to the fact that he's not just sort of aware that at some point there's going to be another phone call, so I have to learn the language. It's more practical than that. Actually, I do need to keep the phone charged so that the mother can reach me when she needs to.
Well, the other thing too is when the audience watches this film, they're feeling the stress, the tension, his
Mm,
catatonic state, the
mm,
trauma of the whole situation. But I hope that the audience also understands that there's even a more powerful emotion that kind of covers all of that, and that
mm.
is Vitaly's compassion.
Exactly.
Because in
Yeah.
the midst of war, in the midst of a passenger plane being shot down by the Russian military, here is a young man with a baby on the way, a mother trying to get a hold of her son who was one of the passengers on the plane. It is that compassion. It's almost like it's an underlying emotion, but when I look
Hmm.
at it, I'm like, it's really the umbrella over all that he's feeling, because
Yeah.
compassion happens when we're moved by another emotion, and that shows
Yeah.
perfectly in this film.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. I think, and again, like that's the connection for me. That was my entry point into the story. Is like, what a and so many stories that I really enjoy are about misunderstandings. So it's about the other truck, the other miners on the field going, Vitaly, chill out, relax. His wife thinking he's cheating on him, and sort of, getting a little bit frustrated with him. Meanwhile, he's actually trying to do something so in some ways like heartbreakingly beautiful and considerate and empathetic, that the world around him couldn't see. And those types of stories really sort of they mean a lot to me. In the DNA of this story, it had that. So I was like, yeah, these are the types of stories I really want to tell. People that are sort of misunderstood by the world, but they're actually trying to do something empathetic and compassionate and beautiful. I'm glad you picked up on that, because I think in the end of the film, I sort of want the audience to feel like Yeva, his wife, felt, because she didn't need to understand the words to understand exactly what was going on by the time he put that phone down to come and embrace him. It's like in that moment, she understood what he was going through, or she understood the context of what he was dealing with. And my hope is also that the audience sort of goes on that similar journey, represented by Yeva.
Well, when they're in the kitchen and he when she was thinking that maybe my husband's cheating on me, he kept quiet. And the reason why he
Yeah.
kept quiet, he didn't want to put I mean, they're deep and dark emotions that he was going through. He didn't want that on her. She's carrying their child. So he didn't
Hmm.
want to put that on her. So he remained quiet.
Right.
And you bring up the perfect word, empathy. And when he took enough time just to try to learn some of the words, so when he could tell that mother, your son has passed. I mean,
Mm.
for a young man, someone at that age, to have enough courage to actually tell a mother, because he could have let the phone die, never talked to her. She could find out on the news. She'll figure out what his
Mm.
flight number was, but he didn't. He went the extra mile to let her
Mm.
know, I found your son's phone, and yes, he passed.
Hmm.
And that, to me, when he just that whole phone exchange, that was deep, that was emotional, but wow, what
Mm.
a scene.
Right, right. Yeah, it was one that we spoke a lot about because uh, the level of perfection of the language that I chatted to with Chris, it was like, how much do we want to get this language perfect? And I was like, you know what, actually, I don't want you to overlearn it because I think it is about words falling through the cracks and the mum hearing key words and going, I don't completely understand you. Can you say that again? And then she's saying that in Dutch and then she switches off to English, which is a more universal language, trying to just find a meeting point where she could more clearly understand what he said. But clearly, you just through hearing her emotion, you could understand what was said. But for me, I didn't want to sort of like over. Hey, Chris, go and learn Dutch and try and speak that all these words fluently because I think it'll be inauthentic. It has to be true to how Vitaly would have tried to learn it for 2 or 3 days, and then it's like some of those words don't even make any sense, but you can hear vliegtuigongeluk, which means airplane crash. So there's I didn't want that to be too performed in a way, too perfect, because I think it needed to stay true to, what do they call it, like Chinese whispers, when a language sort of a message deteriorates when it sort of passes through.
Well, now you gave me another thought because the mother is struggling to find out what happened to her son.
Hmm.
Vitaly is struggling with the whole ordeal of this plane crash, being debris everywhere in their area, including his yard.
Yeah.
And then perfectly, he's struggling with the language to
Hmm.
somehow convey to the mother what had happened. So there's three levels of struggle here that
Hmm.
intertwine, that synergistically worked to perfection in this film. But there's another level of perfection in this film because if I understand correctly, your cinematographer was Farhad Gaderi. Is that correct?
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
also shot Motherland, so I know what his work looks like.
That's
And
right. That's right.
but his work is now for your film,
Yeah.
it is incredible. It is very beautiful. He captured the
Hmm.
reality of the setting of the Ukraine, but also he
Right.
captured the emotional turmoil that Vitaly was going through. So how did you connect with Farhad?
I've done a couple of projects with Farhad, more on the commercial side, but the one thing that I always felt with Farhad, he had a sensitivity. He had it wasn't just technical. He had a human sensitivity. So we could talk about story, even on a commercial. We would talk about the emotionality and the story that we would go for. Which, strangely enough, sometimes that doesn't come up on commercials. It tends to be about beauty and it tends to be about aesthetics. Um, and so I had reached out to Farhad about this project, and he expressed interest. I think I'd done 3 or 4 projects with him before, and then we did this one, and he was such a perfect partner for this project because, for me, shooting on film is sort of a big part of I want to say, the language that I've sort of adopted. And for Farhad as well, we both sort of appreciate that. So we were sort of able to connect on that level as feeling that would be the right format for this. And then we also just decided that we sort of want to have a really restrained visual language, because I think so much of this film was going to be about what happens outside of the frame of the film. The context of the conflict area outside. You hear choppers, you hear it, but you don't really see it. And so I wanted there to be a patience in sort of the approach to our filmmaking, both in terms the pace of the cut of the film, but also in the way that the camera moved or didn't move, and really just rely on the performances. And so we sort of took in some ways, a more classic, post-Soviet or Soviet approach. Tarkovsky obviously was sort of a reference, or Elem Klimov's work in Come and See, Krzysztof Kieslowski's work, and we sort of bonded over wanting to do something in that space because our film sort of existed already in that sort of landscape. And yeah, he was a great partner, both on aesthetics, but particularly emotionally. Yeah.
Yeah, he captured it all with this film, and even the sound mixing was absolutely amazing in this film.
Yeah, that took a while. That took a while for us to get right, and I think it's always that's always sort of the careful balance for me, because I'm a sound engineer or sound designer. Like, I studied audio engineering, and so my background to film is via audio engineering, and I love films where conceptually sound is going to be a big part of the telling of the story. Whether you look at like Oppenheimer or The Zone of Interest, it's such a big part in how that story is told. And I knew when I was writing this film that it was going to be a massive part of the storytelling. Another reference for us was Son of Saul. And Son of Saul was so much about what was happening outside the frame. We was, on that film, you were just behind a character's back, and sound creating a three-dimensional picture in the mind's eye of the trauma that was sort of happening outside of the frame. That I really sort of took that to heart with this film as something that I really wanted to do. And so took a lot of time sort of trying to just carefully calibrate that. And I feel like it's one area where I feel like I would always keep calibrating it, even after a film is released. I'm like, oh, maybe I would have done that differently or this differently, because I guess it's just my background.
I was really surprised that you shot it on film, because the whole situation happened in 2014, which is technically a full-blown digital age, but you chose film, which I appreciate, because it brings more realism to it's the human psyche, it's the human emotion, and that's what I love about this film. From the ground level, it just made everything authentic and real.
Right. Yeah, that is a hard thing for some, for people to really understand. It's a hard thing to sometimes articulate, and it is true that more often than not, I just have to go, well, it's a feeling thing, in terms of how it ultimately renders reality. I just feel I can see when something is shot on film or whether it's shot on digital. There's so many digital tools now with grain and halation that can get so close to the film look, but it isn't just about the look. It is about the way that you act and behave on set. It's the preciousness with which you shoot your material with, and all of almost the ecosystem of shooting on film, all the steps involved with shooting on film creates an end result that, if you were just applying a look afterwards, would still not give you the same look. And so for me, it's, like I said, I think the first time I shot film was in 2016. And up until that point, I'd been shooting for maybe 3 or 4 years, and I was always sort of grading things to then look like film. And the first time I rolled film, I was like, this is it for me. This is the language. This is how I want to tell my stories. And so, yeah, I've just invested into film cameras. We shot this on one of my cameras, and it's definitely the way I want to keep telling stories, is through that lens, because I think, like you said, from the ground up, you're sort of making a commitment to the type of story and the way you want to tell the story by deciding to shoot on film. And it's not to disparage people who shoot digitally. It's just when you find something that speaks your language, or you speak some of its language, there's like a mutual connection, that I just want to deepen.
But see, here's the thing I like about film. I had a top filmmaker tell me one time. He goes, "You know the difference between shooting on film and shooting digitally is?" I said, "No." He said, "With film, look at the blacks. They dance."
Yeah.
He goes,
Yeah,
"They
it's
don't
true.
do that
Exactly.
on digital." And
Right.
because the human eye can pick up movement even when we don't actually know that it's moving. So it
Yeah.
brings it just brings a human element to it all. Now with this
Yeah.
film, Moeder, what has been the audience's reaction to it?
I'm trying to think. So I've showed it at a couple of festivals. It's done a lot of international festivals and a couple of festivals here in New York. I think people generally go, oh sorry, not in New York, but here in the US. People generally go, "Wow, that was intense, and I need to watch it again." But I think people are drawn to it. I think, I think for some people it may be too much, because I think people, and it's understandable. Some people want to laugh, and that's something. Strangely enough, it is something that I do want to do. I do want to do some dark comedic work. But for this one, I think because it was a short film format, I was like, you know what, and it deals with war. It's like I sort of just need to lean in and commit to tell the story in the way that in the way that it felt true to both my research and just the correspondence, or the insight that I got from my consultants, the partners that I was working with, my first AD, my script consultant, my dialect consultant, and my producer. But I think people are taking to it, and I think it is a film that, in my opinion, probably would be somewhat divisive, just because there's the high wire act of Vitaly's character and the restraint that we've sort of decided just as a filmmaking choice, a storytelling choice. But it's amazing to me when people connect to it and they see what I was going for. Like, to me, that's like, oh, sometimes you do it. I think for me, I do films for me. Hopefully, if it speaks to me, it speaks to other people. And it's been great seeing people really respond to very specific choices. You've outlined some of them today as well. And it's amazing that people are picking up on those nuances.
Yeah, and that's what makes a film great. And and one more element of this film, the colorization is incredible.
Right.
Because it caps it off with the emotion, the storytelling, shooting on film. You have those scenes where there's minimal light, which works. But whoever your colorist is, I want to hire them.
Well, I think I think it's such a three-way partnership there: production design, cinematography, and color and film. You can't look past what film does to bring out color. But I think for me, the Ukrainian landscape and those interiors with the paintings in the back and the multi-textured, details on the couch, and the color that came from the little fish tank on the side, when they were doing the interview. All those production design elements, I think, really contribute to how the color really plays. And Mikey, my colorist, did an amazing job to sort of just bring all those elements together. And in some ways, I feel like, yes, I want the film to have very much a realism to it, but there's also sort of a, dare I say, like a mythological quality to it. Not because the story is a myth at all, but I sort of wanted to feel like there's a fable-like you're brought into a fable of a story, even though it is reality. It's like a neorealist fable, maybe. I don't know what you would call it, but
No, it is. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. And that's what I love about some short films that are based on true stories, are the interpretation of the story, which is what Moeder is all about. Now you're Oscar
yeah.
qualified. How does that feel?
It feels great. I think I can honestly say when I first made the film, I submitted to some festivals. I've never really done the festival route. I've never really done a short film that I'd put out for festivals, and there was a couple of denials, and so I thought, okay, well, that's it. It's maybe not for everyone. And then it got into one festival that I didn't even really know how big they were, and it sort of had a life after that. And I was excited, not expecting it. And then someone saw this film, London PR saw this film, and they really loved it, and they then gave it another lease of life. So yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting that it's lived this long. I'm looking forward for people in my community and my friends to see it, because it's just lived on in the festival space. But I think that should come hopefully soon enough.
It will come soon enough. And ladies and gentlemen, on July 17th, 2014, flight MH17 crashed after being hit by a surface-to-air missile 50 kilometers from the Russian-Ukrainian border, carrying predominantly Dutch passengers. Now, the miners were the first to arrive at the crash zone and spent days retrieving and identifying hundreds of bodies scattered all over the highly militarized area. Now, 298 people died on flight MH17 that day, but many of the victims' families attempted to reach their loved ones by reported hearing strangers speaking a foreign language answering their calls. Now, Moeder, well, Dutch for mother, is a heartbreaking, compelling, and a very emotional short film that deals with the reality of that tragic day. The cinematography of Moeder is beautiful, but it amplifies the tense drama, the emotional inner turmoil of a young Vitaly who is torn between wanting to tell the mother who keeps calling for her son that he has died, and then being told to go search and help locate the dead from that flight MH17. Now, Salomon brings us a very strong contender to the Oscar race with Moeder, and when you get a chance to see it, be prepared. It is a very powerful film. And Salomon, I want to thank you so much for sharing this film with me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having a look. Thank you for having this conversation.
You're very welcome. And again, ladies and gentlemen, if you ever get a chance to see Moeder, it will be available probably pretty soon for public viewing. But right now, it's in the Oscars portal. So all the Academy members, they're taking their time watching this film amongst the others. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for watching and listening. As for me, you're either going to see me at the movies or from the red carpet.